Hey everybody, it's Tim. I'm not putting up a new episode this week because I'm trying to get some other things done in my, actual life. But I thought rather than nothing, it would be nice to put out an old show, one of my favorites from 10 years ago, when Kumar and I talked about the manga Death Note. It's not quite up to the recording quality or editing standards of the more recent stuff. You can see the points where I've mostly improved. But it's a great discussion and a great comic, so hope you'll enjoy this, and we'll see you next week with Kumar and Emmett's discussion of Lock and Key. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne, and this week we're talking about Death Note, which is a Japanese comic series, not to use the M word. It's 12 volumes, written by Tsugumi Ohba and art by Takeshi Obata. And this, I guess this was serialized in a phone book manga starting in 03 apparently?
Shonen Jump. And that's key. I mean, we're going to come back. That's a very important point.
Okay.
Which we'll get back. Yeah.
And from counting the number of chapters, apparently it lasted about 2 years. A little over 2 years. So it's 12 volumes, which is kind of short for...
I think there was a little break. I think there was a little intermission in there.
Oh, yeah?
Some time off. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. But
well, in the story, there's an intermission in time.
That's right.
I have no idea about the
Was
publication.
That a spoiler?
I don't think so. Yeah, yeah. Well, we're trying to be very conscious of spoilers in this, because the story takes so many twists and turns. And big reveals and things that you didn't expect to happen, where there's a risk of spoiling the whole dang thing. So what we thought we'd do is confine ourselves to the first 3 volumes, more or less, minus the big reveal at the end of volume 3, and then give a spoiler warning, and then nothing sacred. So, yeah. One other thing I wanted to say first. The title, Death Note, in Japanese, noto is notebook, which if you taught English in Japan for more than 10 minutes has driven you crazy, probably.
Right.
Because people, students come in and say, I wrote this in my note. No, you wrote it in your notebook.
Yes.
So, and in the... I'm sorry? Oh, yeah.
I was about to say there's a lot of, I think, actually Japlish is a selling point for manga in the U.S., believe it or not. Because it gives it this hint of authenticity or whatever. And I remember I translated this series for Dark Horse called Kawaii Hon in Japanese. And Dark Horse was going to put out under the literal title Scary Book. And I suggested to my editor, why don't we translate it as Book of Fear, which sounds classier, and is also exactly the same translation.
Yeah.
And he did it to the marketing people, and they said the marketing people said that the kids in the mall rats who buy the books actually prefer to have a bit of a kookier Japanese sound. So Death Note might have been the wacky title, which it should be Death Notebook, which doesn't have quite the ring to it. Probably was one of the reasons the series was quite popular in the States as well. One element.
Sometimes they call it a notebook in the story, and sometimes they call it a note.
They do, but they've written on the notebook on the front in the artwork Death Note, so they're kind of stuck with having to call it Death Note once in a while to explain it.
Now, you suggested that we review this. Why did you choose this?
The reason I chose this was it was on my want list for a long time. And then I, as always, I was reading Comics Reporter, and he had put out this list of all these comics you can get pretty cheaply, And there was this Death Note box set, and I said, let's see how much that cost in Australia. And it was $125 for the box set. Mm-hmm. So you get the box with the 12 volumes and the 13th appendix interview book or whatever. Oh. So that was just it was too good a deal. That's why I chose it. I didn't know if it would be worth talking about in any way. I knew it was super popular. I wanted to get it eventually. I didn't know if it would even be worth talking about, but I said, look, it's in the shop. It's $125 Australian. I'm going to buy it whether we talk about it or not. So that was...
Okay, so you hadn't read it before or seen the anime or anything?
I had not. No. I knew it was about a notebook that you write people's names in, and the person whose name you've written dies. Mm-hmm. And that's the single fact I knew about it. I didn't know a single other thing.
That was about all I knew. And I'd seen pictures of the death god Duke, and that was it. That was the limit of my knowledge of it. Also,
right.
But yeah, it. I guess when we picked it up, I mean, I got it from the base library, so it didn't cost me $125 anything. But so I wasn't sure if I would like it or be interested in it, and it defied my expectations repeatedly, in good ways and bad.
Yes,
but in general, I liked it better than I expected to.
Right.
So,
I found I didn't know whether I was going to like it or not either, honestly. But I found I had, especially in the early volumes, I constantly had a smile on my face while I was reading it.
Yeah, there are funny parts to it. That was something that surprised
there are funny parts, and it's funny the way it unfolds. I did. Well, I don't know. I guess we'll get to it later. But I did wonder if it could have been 8 volumes or 7 or 9 instead of necessarily 12.
Yeah, it felt,
even though it's short for a manga series because it's not 40 volumes. But it felt like it almost could have been trimmed a little bit more.
It felt to me somewhat like maybe there was urging from an editor to make it longer. Like, keep it going in Jump.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was hugely popular. And the editors are notorious for putting pressure on the artists to do that. But apparently, the writer Ohba had the ending. He knew that he had the end scene in mind at the beginning, even though he didn't know how it was going to end or how long it was going to take to get there. So he did have an end point.
The concept, I write somebody's name in a notebook and they die, it sounded at first a little bit to me like 100 bullets. And so I was expecting that maybe one character would have it for a while and then that story would end and it would be more episodic and then somebody else would get it and it would kind of turn over like that. But it's not like that exactly. It's
not, but sometimes it's kind of...
Well, I mean, it does have several kind of arcs to it, but there's a story running all the way through it with some consistent characters.
Yes, sure, yes. And 100 Bullets has that, too.
I'm sorry? Oh, 100 Bullets.
In terms of the bullet givers. But
yeah,
that's a whole other thing, too.
Yeah. So to kind of set up the first part of the story, it begins in the realm of the Shinigami, the death gods, and according to this story, anyone who dies, they died because a death god wrote their name in a notebook. And
I don't think it's anyone that dies, but that's one way that people get killed.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's clearly things that happen later on that are not like. That people died that their name was not written in a book by Shinigami. I think Shinigami kills some people. Well, the point that comes up later is that Shinigami extend their lives by stealing the remaining life of humans, and they do that by writing the name in their notebook. So it's not every death is prescribed by a Shinigami, and we don't even know how many there are. There might not even be more than 20. you only see about 10 in the course of the series, I think. So we don't know how many are out there. But anyway.
Yeah, yes. and what's really interesting about the Shinigami is they really don't act the way you would expect them to. They're sitting around kind of bored. You would not be surprised to find out they work in cubicles, although they don't.
Right.
And they're sitting around gambling all day. They're kind of bored.
Right. They are, and at one point, Ryuk, the main Shinigami in the series, makes the point that if Shinigami die, it's usually out of laziness because they forgot to write somebody's name in their book and steal the life.
And they don't even seem to know all the rules of their notebook. Like, you would expect them to come in and announce everything and be 100% certain of all the ins and outs, but there are some facts that Ryuk doesn't know.
Right.
Or
yes. Yeah, he does seem kind of, he seems a bit thick or slow. And a lot of them are kind of not very bright. But interestingly sometimes Ryuk does know rules, and he does not tell them to Light, the main character who has the notebook for most of the series.
Right.
Or he hides certain details from him. And when the book starts, when the series starts, it's very clearly a Faust kind of template. Like devil kind of thing. So Ryuk shows up, and Light, this kid Light with the strange name, which we'll get to,
yes.
Ends up with the book.
Yeah, he's a high school student.
And it gives him power. It's just exactly the same thing as Faust, right? Where the devil shows up and he makes a deal with... Faust is very educated, he's a smart genius. And this guy's the top kid in school. And he makes a deal with the devil, basically, and Light makes... not a deal per se, but he basically ends up with this devil hanging around, much like Mephistopheles in Faust. And I actually thought, when I read the first volume, I thought this is going to play out just like Faust. And it doesn't until the very end, basically, the last couple of pages or whatever. But anyway.
Yeah. So... Light gets the notebook, and he decides that he's going to use it to kill criminals, and this will result in the world becoming a utopia, because everyone will be afraid that if they commit crimes, they will be killed by him. And it's interesting. I mean, he at first asks himself if he's got the guts to do it, and he has kind of some qualms about it, but he gets over it really quickly. And pretty soon he's talking about, I'm going to be the god of this new world.
That's right. And a sort of religion forms around him. They call him Kira, which also kind of is a play on the English killer. And he becomes... People start to almost... And it becomes common knowledge that there's this mystical force out there, person, that's killing criminals.
Yeah, I want to talk about his name.
Okay.
Now, Yagami is his family name, which means like evening god, basically.
Yeah, so moon,
god of darkness.
Yeah.
And Light is his bizarre first name, which is written with the character for moon.
Yes.
And then that he's called, by people who don't know who he is, Kira, which sounds like killer, but it could also be, like Kira, like glitter.
Glitter,
shininess.
shiny.
So it's sort of this, maybe depends on how people look at him as someone doing something very good or very bad by killing criminals, by killing murderers. I feel go ahead.
There's an interesting thing here, because as soon as I saw that his name was Light, I thought, wait a second, I need to know what this guy's name was in the original Japanese. And in the original Japanese version, he has the kanji for moon, and his name is Raito.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, so his name actually could be right, as in moral.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, I mean, everything in the book points to being light, and I don't know if the authors even understood the double play there, because if you think about the name his father, and this is, as we mentioned before the podcast started, is a spoiler for the first 40 pages, is the chief of the National Police Agency in Japan. And he is the most honorable character in the whole series. He always does what's right. Mm-hmm. And he never crosses into the gray area or the dark side. Yeah. And that guy would name his son Right. It seems to me. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they consider that or not, but there is a double meaning there. And I found his last name, Yagami, evening god, was such a kind of strangely too obvious. But I don't know. But the other weird thing about his name, Light, was in the first couple of pages of Volume 1, when he finds the notebook, it has some of the rules of using it written inside. Mm-hmm. And the rules are written in English. Mm-hmm. And Light complains how annoying it is that the rules of the book are written in English. And I'm like, your name is Light. You're annoyed that the rules are written in English? It was a strange thing. But anyway.
And then we should mention that a lot of the chapters end with a page of the how to use it,
yes.
which become like really kind of arcane and funny at some points.
They do, and it's interesting because sometimes those were very weird, because I found that at the beginning they were really, really interesting. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes they would tell you something that the characters didn't know, that Light didn't know. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it would tell you something that Ryuk know, but he wasn't telling Light, or something that would come into play in later chapters. Yeah. But I found as you got on, by the time you get to volume 11 or 12, they really did not need to be there. They were not adding...
Yeah, they were, becoming irrelevant. A lot of
they were becoming irrelevant.
Filling space.
They were filling. Exactly, yeah. They had turned into filler by that stage. Mm-hmm. But they do have an interesting dramatic role, at least in the first couple of volumes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we should mention also that, and as Light gradually figures out, it's not just writing a person's name in the notebook. You can write the time that they're going to die, and you can, to some extent, control what they do before they die and what the method of death is.
Yes, if it's within the realm of possibility at the time. So if you write, Tim will die in Guatemala at 8:30, it's not going to happen because you're in Tokyo at the time. But the default method of death is heart attack.
Yeah. If you just write their name, it's a heart attack. Or if the method that you write won't work, then it's a heart attack.
It always defaults to heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And right from the beginning, Duke is really kind of amoral in this. He's just an observer. He's delivered the notebook to a human because he was bored, basically. He just wants to see what's going to happen. Yeah. And Light says, "I'll make this a world inhabited only by people I decide are good." And Duke says, "You do something like that, the only one left with a bad personality will be you," which is right on the money.
Right. Right, especially in this book, because everybody's got kind of a gray... Well, almost everybody, except for his father, has kind of a gray area. Where you're not too... Yeah, they probably wouldn't make it in the long run. But when Light announces his plan that he's gonna remake the world in his image, Ryuk just finds that he thinks, great, this is going to be more interesting than I expected. Because most people just use the book once or twice and then...
or just for personal gain.
Yes, or for personal gain, and then misfortune befalls them is the expression I think they use a couple of times. Like, people who encounter the book tend to have bad things happen to them. Yeah. Basically. So normally, this kind of situation with the Light is not usually what happens when people get the book.
Right. But now, by volume 2, he's already sort of expanding the range of people he will kill to people who are trying to stop him. And he goes off the rails pretty early. Yes.
Then it gets interesting, doesn't it? And Yeah, he starts killing the FBI agents that have been sent over to find him, and they're innocent, you know.
Right, yeah. Their only crime was trying to stop him.
Right. Oh, and we should also announce that they bring in this super detective by the name of L, the letter L, and it really becomes a cat and mouse game between Light and L for most of the series. And as soon as he sees L for the first time, the other thing about the book is you have to think about the person's face. You have to know their name, and you have to have their face in your mind when you write their name. So you need to know what they look like. So L shows himself on TV, and he gives his full name, and of course, Light writes it in the book without thinking. Just instantly writes it in. He's like, bam, kills the guy. Of course, it turns out not to actually be L, but a stand-in. But he crosses the moral line just, pretty instantly. But then he always justifies it by saying, these people are, those are a few deaths in the way of a perfect world, which is, for him, I mean, having a perfect world far outweighs any minor deaths along the way, even the deaths of good people.
Yeah, well, it overrules pretty much everything. I mean, you see him, like, with women or with his family, he's just using everybody.
I actually wondered if he was going to kill anybody in his family.
So did I.
Yeah, I was constantly wondering it. I hope that's not a spoiler to say the word constantly. But, yeah. Yes, and it's interesting because another interesting thing about that is later on he starts using another person to use the notebook for him for various reasons in his place, Teru Mikami. And Mikami is much, much worse than Light. I mean, Mikami kills criminals, but he doesn't just kill... He decides he's going to kill formerly convicted criminals, so who've done their time and are out of jail. Or people who he just considers bad, who haven't actually committed a crime.
Yeah.
And when you see that, there's a scene where you kind of feel like, wow, Light's not that bad. And I kind of felt morally... I mean... I shouldn't admit this, but I have power fantasies about changing the world if I had magical powers. You know what I mean? And I mean, Superman is a power fantasy of one kind, but this Death Note is way beyond anything any super muscled superhero comics have ever come up with. Because he has this magic. He finds the magic item which he can literally change the world with. And I kind of was like, wow, yeah, man. And I could kind of understand how Shonen Jump readers, because Shonen Jump, it's quite often they find a magic item and it leads them on their adventures or whatever. And I very much early on, I felt like when he said he was going to kill all the criminals and change the world, I was like, yeah, I was like, yeah, it's a great idea. If I had that book, that's what I'd do. And I'd also, get rid of professional sports. And so it's annoyed me. So I was kind of on the wrong side of this book. I mean, I really didn't know what the authors were intending. Because in the if you read the interviews, all they care about was telling a story. And they claim they were not thinking about the moral side of it at all. But I wanted to be on Light's side. And
yeah, you want to be, but it's so awkward.
It is awkward. That's right. He does things that make you not able to be on his side. I wanted to get rid of all the criminals. I thought that was a great idea, but he's killing off the FBI agents, and you never wonder. You wonder if he's going to kill his family. He kills people who are just kind of onto him. Yeah. The book's into a whole strange moral space, but that was another thing I thought, maybe we'll come back to it, but I don't know, maybe that was as much of it as we can discuss because the authors never really intended it to go any further than that.
When you mentioned Jump, was that why you said you were going to talk about it later? Because
certain things, and I mean, Takeshi Obata's previous series, I mean, he's not the writer, he's the artist, but it's funny because what was it? Hikaru no Go, which is about this kid that finds a haunted Go board And the spirit of the Go board is this old Go master, and he becomes a Go champion, and it's constantly this battle of wits in these Go games, and it seems very similar to Death Note, but in the innocent Shonen Jump way. It's because it's almost the same thing where Ryuk is haunting Light, and they have the magical object. In this case, it's Death Note, not the board. And it's that chess, that kind of battle of wits thing going on constantly. This series is very low on action for a Shonen Jump series. It's very unusual because those Shonen Jump series are always about jumping around and fighting and stuff. And this is just talking, not even talking, this is about thinking. Because often there's cameras and listening devices surrounding suspects. So, they can only think. All you get is these captions of thoughts, pages and pages of people thinking. It's totally unusual for Shonen Jump. But the other point about Shonen Jump was this is, it's supposed to be, it's actually kind of, it subverts the shonen manga genre completely, because shonen is about, friendship and perseverance. But, his perseverance is trying not to get caught. It is, in a sense, if you just plug in all of the checklists of the things you're supposed to do in a shonen manga, he does all of them, but for completely the wrong, immoral reasons, and yet somehow it still fits in that Shonen Jump checklist, if you know what I mean. So I find it's very interesting that it was in that magazine, because it's not like anything else in there, and yet it is exactly the same at the same time.
Yeah, I was thinking. I'd expected it to be something like 100 Bullets. It's sort of like 100 Bullets with unlimited bullets and incorporating an extreme and reckless take on Plato's Republic. Well, I thought of that because what I remember of Plato's Republic from however many decades ago I read it. Right. It's like making a perfect society and deciding who's going to get to reproduce and who's not.
Right.
This is more extreme. Just wipe out the people that aren't part of the perfect society.
And he was like pro-slavery in that too, wasn't he?
Perhaps. I don't
remember. Yeah, I always, as you know, I always mix up my Greek philosophers on these podcasts. And one of them was really pro-slavery. It also reminded me of, strangely, Infernal Affairs. Have you seen the Hong Kong movie?
No.
Have you seen The Departed, the American remake by Scorsese?
No, haven't.
It's a lot of espionage with cell phones. Like, it's a lot of double who knows what about who else, because there's a criminal spy in the police, and there's a police spy in the criminal gang. They're in each other's teams, and like the cell phone is always like it's practically a character in the movie. Like, so I felt that I almost felt that like it was a deliberate influence on the series. I'm not sure that it was, but it felt so similar at times to that movie. Anyway.
Wanted to point out I have a couple of notes here. Something that I thought was kind of a good bit, and again, it's sort of I would say it's kind of foreshadowing. This is volume 2, page 67. Light is talking about his plans while Duke is watching the K1 fight between Akebono and Bob Sapp.
Okay.
Which is like a nice little contemporary reference there. And he's enjoying the fight as Light says the real battle starts now, and then Duke, looking at the TV, says, "Huh? It's over already." So, and I took note of that the first time I read it, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it other than that it was funny. And then I tried to reread the whole series. I didn't give myself enough time. I just made it to the beginning of volume 8 the second time.
Wow, okay.
But reading it the second time, I was thinking, oh, okay, this is sort of like saying that it's already decided how this is going to end.
Right.
Or how it's going to end for Light.
Now, without, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but in the very first volume, in maybe chapter 1, Ryuk says, "I'm going to write your name. Eventually, I'm going to write your name in my notebook."
Mm-hmm.
So, whether or not you reach that point at the end of volume 12, I won't reveal. But it seems like a lot of it is foreshadowed in ways, and in a lot of ways, it's things are unexpected. I mean, but the other interesting thing about this is he repeatedly, say the writer Ohba, he did not plan anything.
Oh, really?
He knew what the final scene was going to be, but at the end of every chapter, he had to plan the next one. Like he knew a certain point, and he was like, "How can I get to that as quickly as possible?" And then he had to plan the next thing. He really did not know what was going to happen, which is why I think it sags a bit, between volumes 8 and 11. Because he tried to have something happen in every chapter, but it was not planned.
Interesting. Because there's something else after the spoiler warning that he must have had planned out. I thought he must have had planned out pretty meticulously. But yeah, then when L and Light finally meet, that's when it really starts to heat up, and they've got this chess match going between the two of them, and thinking, now if I do this, he's going to think that I'm Kita, but if I do that, then he's also going to think I'm Kita. So should I do this, or maybe he's expecting me to do that?
What's great about that is, well, what happens is Light goes through his entrance exams to university. Because at Started Book, he's in high school. Then he ends up in a university. And when he's giving the keynote speech, because he entered with the highest scores, there's a second person on the stage with him. And the second person comes on stage and turns out to be L. We know it's L. And shortly afterwards, he walks up to Light, who he suspects is Kira. And Light also already knows that L suspects he's Kira at this stage. And L says to him, "I am L," which is something you never expect. Like, he just immediately reveals his identity. And apparently that's another one of the things in the interviews. They were saying he didn't know what was going to happen in that scene, and he came to it and he said the best thing to do is just have him reveal his name. Like, he didn't plan any of this. But that's kind of an incredible thing, which leads to all these other developments and that incredible tennis game, which, it's always about the battle of wits, the cat and mouse thing between these two.
Yeah, the tennis scene was pretty hilarious, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, I'm about ready to give the spoiler warning, but for people who don't want to listen to the rest of it because they think they might read it, would you recommend Death Note? I'm
going to say yes. I think it's really for a few reasons. One, it's self-contained. By which I mean it's only 12 volumes. Mm-hmm. So and you can get the box set. So it's affordable compared to many other manga series out there. Yeah. It has already had a lot of crossover appeal, and by which I mean not just East to West, but Death Note is one of those manga which, while it was coming out, was being read by everybody. Like the superhero people as well were reading it, and all sorts of people were reading it. Mm-hmm. So even if I don't know what your tastes are, it might appeal to you because it seems to appeal to a lot of people. It's worth it. I mean, I don't know so much about the middle, but it starts out great, and you have to see how it ends. I mean, you want to know how it ends. You don't want it. Mm-hmm. You don't give it up after. If it starts sagging a bit, it's not like, well, I'm going to stop reading it. I mean, the end's in sight at the end of volume 12. So, it's
it's not perfect, but I would recommend it as an interesting read.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that we're recommending it when we haven't really talked about the writing or the art.
Okay, well, we can do that before the spoiler warning. That's not a spoiler.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess we have talked about how it's mostly dialogue and how he didn't plan anything else. But it's really, I mean, it's gripping. Like it's, mm-hmm. I mean, it's a page turner. Mm-hmm. That there's no doubt. The other thing is, like a Light, everybody has, especially non-Japanese characters, have the most insane, wacky names. That make no sense. like Ray Penber and Quillish Whammy.
That's my favorite.
Quillish Whammy, who runs a orphanage called Whammy House, I think is the number one offender in the book for wackiest name. An FBI agent shows up named John McEnroe. It was just just bizarre names.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what was up with that. He said in the interviews he mentions he wanted to have names which did not exist in the real world but could, and I thought there's no way Quillish Whammy could exist in the real world. I think he was fooling himself.
Not in the English-speaking world, anyway.
That reminded me of another thing I have to mention, which is the translation, because it switches translators 2 times.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't checking the credits, but...
Well, the first volume, because it's funny, because the first 4, the translation was great. And the name of the translator is, let me find it, Pookie Rolf. And I thought, Pookie Rolf that's a name worthy of this series. And that's why, whoever this guy is, I thought this guy is a character in this book, and he had earned the right to translate Death Note. And then they switched to a different translator about volume 5, and I can't remember the name of that translator, but it wasn't interesting. It wasn't an interesting name. And there were
Alexis Kirsch.
Okay, typos left and right start showing up. It was annoying. Then volume 8, they switched to another translator, and the typos disappear, but suddenly it just felt lifeless. Like all the juice had gone out of the translation. It just seemed like every character was just delivering information without any personality.
Tetsuichiro Miyake.
Yeah, so there you go. I have to mention that, because when I remembered, when you mentioned the wacky names, I had to mention Pookie Rolf. The art style is really clean and engaging. It's really...
and it's not. I wouldn't call it manga-y. I mean, like there are some cute girls in here, but they're cute in a more realistic way. They're not like the big eye manga girls.
His Light's father seems to have been drawn in a very westernized, like Western comic style. Like he looked like Commissioner Gordon from Batman or something.
Yes.
Like he seems so out of place sometimes because he was drawn in this really straight ahead. But the art's really straightforward, and it never gets in the way. Like it's just there to draw you through the story, and it was So that's it. The art's good, the writing's good, the names make no sense. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I would too. The spoiler warning is coming up in a minute. First, here's a message from a fellow member of the Comics Podcast Network.
Oh, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to, Anyway, hey, Justique, want to do the intro today?
No.
Audio Shocker Podcast, Audio Shocker Podcast, Audio Shocker Podcast,
Audio Shocker Podcast.
A podcast with Ross and Nick.
Hey, Neil, do you want to hear about this incest anime that we watched?
Not really. I mean, I think we should keep it mildly clean.
Are you serious?
Why?
Did you really just say that?
I said mildly clean.
Why?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? What did you do with Neil? Where is Neil?
He might be in a gutter somewhere.
Okay, all points bulletin spoiler warning. Don't listen if you think you want to read it, or listen after you read it. Or listen if you don't care and you just want to see what we say about it. We're going to spoil the living crap out of it.
Okay.
So, at the end of Volume 3, a second Kita appears.
Yes.
And there's a lot of doubt about who it is, although it's interesting because, Light is absent from that part of the story, and so you're wondering, is it Light or is it
Well,
somebody else? Although the MO seems different.
Yeah, it's presented in such a way that you feel like it couldn't be Light. Like there's a dramatic shift in Kira's personality. And the thing is, they've always talked about other Death Notes. Like every Shinigami has one, and they've talked about them falling into the human world in the past. And also, we know that Ryuk has two, which is another key point, because you're always wondering what's going on with the second book. Like, or I was always wondering, like, when are we going to see Ryuk's second book show up in some way? Yeah.
So it turns out to be this cute younger girl, Misa, who idolizes Kira because Kira killed the person who killed her parents. And eventually, I don't want to go through a point-by-point thing of the whole story, but she does meet Light, and
in a hilarious thing.
And she wants to be his girlfriend, and he just wants to use her. Right. And it's amazing. I mean, you can see how focused he is on his goal, because she'll be wearing the slinkiest stuff and looking so cute and awesome, and he just doesn't even notice. Yeah.
Well, there's a moment. There's one single panel where after they first meet, where he seems to stop himself. He's like, "What are you doing? Like, don't get in."
A lot of idiots make that mistake of starting to fall for the girl. So
and I thought, and even that moment, I thought, because Light is he's the smartest guy in the world, basically, and she's a complete ditz. And even in that panel, I questioned why he was even interested in her at all, except maybe physically, but the other girls you see him with, because he's a real ladies' man, which is also a big change from most shonen manga, where they have girl troubles, Peter Parker type girl. And he's a big ladies' man, but he always seems to go for a different type than Misa. I thought that something about that didn't ring true to me, that one panel, that he would be interested in her at all.
I see.
But anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, she's so ditzy that she never considers that he's using her, or that he might be thinking of killing her eventually, which he repeatedly thinks about. And then something else comes up to prevent him from doing it, or you decide to put it off, or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, I would almost consider this the biggest spoiler, is to talk about the period where he forgets about the Death Note.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we can spoil it, because we have to. To me, we have to talk about the scene in Volume 7 where he gets it back.
Okay.
Because
we should. Well, go ahead.
If you can let me ramble for a while, okay?
Okay.
I'll
go get dinner. See
ya. All right. Let me spoil the hell out of this.
Okay.
Light is suspected by L of being Kira, so he has to prove his innocence. So what he does is, there's this thing where if you lose ownership of the Death Note, you lose all of your memories of having it and everything that happened around it that had to do
the existence of it.
Right. If you get it back, you get your memories back. So through some complicated finagling, Light agrees to be confined by L to prove his innocence. He says, "You lock me up and you watch, people will stop dying." And L's like, "Well, I don't know." I says, I have the feeling he's got some trick up his sleeve, but I'm going to do it. So he locks him up for something like a month.
And Misa also, because Misa's also suspected.
Right, Misa's also tied up, which is part of why he comes up with this plan. But anyway, at a certain point during his confinement, Light tells Ryuk to get rid of the book, by which means he, take away ownership of it. When he gives up ownership of it, he completely forgets everything. He forgets the thing exists. And everything that had anything to do with it. But before he'd done that, he had Ryuk write a couple of fake rules in the book. And one of the fake rules was, if you don't kill somebody within 13 days of the previous killing, you will die. when the police finally get the book and they see this rule, they realize that since he was in confinement for more than 13 days, he must not be Kira, is the conclusion. And therefore, he's cleared of suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while they're getting this book...
we know very little of the setup before it happens.
That's right. We don't know any of this.
Until he does.
We don't know what he's got up his sleeve, which is one of the great things about the series, because you never know. People just enter into plans, and you don't know why they've done it until later.
Yeah.
Right? They just say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. You're like, what? This is insane. And you're like, this is insane. Why is he giving up the book? And he gives up the book, and you're like, he doesn't have it again for like 3 volumes. And you're wondering, like, how is he going to... he just becomes light again.
Yeah. During those 2... It's basically 2 volumes. Somebody else has the notebook, and they figure out that it's somebody at a company called Yotsuba, this big corporation, and there are these 8 guys, the top of the company, or I guess they're the top of the company. But there are these 8 guys at Yotsuba. One of them has the notebook. None of them knows which one of them has the notebook.
Yes,
and they're using it they're deciding who to kill for the benefit of their company.
Right.
And so Light, completely earnestly, because he's forgotten about the notebook, he's helping L try to track down Kira. Right.
Okay. Yes, that's right. He's partnered. He's joined the police. He's partnered. He's on the Kira hunting team, and he's genuinely trying to find Kira because he doesn't know that he was Kira. It's the most amazing thing. Now, the thing I love is in Volume 7, in the opening pages, he gets the book back. And the second his hands touch it, all of the memories flood back. So through this complicated scheme, he's actually managed to get the book back exactly the way he had planned, which he didn't know he had planned while he didn't have the book, which is another amazing thing about it. But the incredible thing about this scene is as soon as he touches the memories come back, you get this full-page flash of him with this completely evil, sinister look on his face, and he says, like, I win. And it's just like one full page, and it's the most...
Exactly as planned, he says.
That's right, he says, I win exactly as planned. And this page is not only the best page in Death Note, I think it's one of the best pages of any comic ever. Because you have to go back and rethink the whole series up to that point. Because... it's interesting because Light starts out as this innocent school kid, high school. He's super smart, but you don't know morally where he stands. Then he picks up this book and he's like, I'm going to kill all the criminals. And as I said earlier, I was kind of like, okay, that's good. That's interesting. And I'm on your side. And then he gets slowly worse, but you don't really realize how bad. Like he's constantly trying to stay a step ahead of the police, etc. And you don't really realize how bad he is. And then he gives up the notebook and he becomes Kira again. And he joins the police and he starts giving these speeches, not to other people, but in his mind, he's like, I want to catch Kira. Kira is evil. Kira is wrong. If I ever got a Death Note, what would I do? I would never do anything like that. But he thinks himself. And then the instant you get this, where he touches the book and you get that full-page splash, he's a physically different person almost.
Yeah, his eyes change.
His eyes change. It's so dramatically different, and you're like, how could he believe in his heart that he was not this, that he would not ever do anything like that with the Death Note? And then, split second later, he's worse than we remembered him. That moment, you see the complete difference between the two sides of him. And
well, Mike, I was talking with my kids about this because, of course, they've read it. And they were saying they didn't really get the reason for that interlude with the Yotsuba group. And I think, aside from it being his plan to clear himself of being Kira, it also gives us this look at Light without a Death Note and how different he is. That is so key to me. I mean, to me, that was the center point of the whole series. And the thing I cared about most after reading the whole 12 volumes, every day... And to this day, I still think about that page because it has totally stayed with me of what this guy thought he was going to. This is what Star Wars Episode 1, 2, and 3 were supposed to be, with Anakin becoming Darth Vader. I mean, it really is. This is the kind of difference between light and dark, pardon the pun,
that those movies are supposed to be. I thought it was just the most amazing thing. The Yotsuba stuff was fat. I mean, it was not. It didn't need to be there. I mean, it could have been something else for 2 volumes. But we really did need to see what light was. And I refuse to believe that the authors of this book were avoiding any discussion of morality, because you cannot help but think about it when you see transformation. Because you don't really think it's so gradual, the transformation, that you don't really realize how much he has changed until you see them one after the other, literally within 1 page of each other. You know what I mean?
Well, did you notice while he's not Kita, basically, he not only does he think that he could never kill people that way, but he also says that he could never use women exactly the way that he does.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
It's volume 5, page 58. He says, even if it's to solve the Kita case, I could never play with a woman's emotions like that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, really. Yeah. Isn't it? It's fascinating, isn't it? I thought it was. Yes. I thought that was just genius. Now, to all the people that I didn't recommend the book to before this, I mean, you have to read the book you have to read to volume 7 at least, because it's just such an amazing thing. And even if I've spoiled it, I mean, I haven't spoiled it. It's the journey of watching how he changes slowly and not realizing that he's changed, because it's taken 1,000 pages into this thing, and the changes I felt quite gradual. Mm-hmm. And the author in the interview book mentions that he felt that Light was a victim of the Death Note, and I think that's debatable, whatever the author says. Mm. And on that moment, I really felt like, boy, is he a victim? Is that Light with that evil look on his face saying, I win exactly as planned? Or is that, has the death corrupted him? Because it is absolute power, and it has corrupted him absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'm exactly what my note is here, too. The question of, does the Death Note have some kind of power to corrupt people, or is it just the power itself that has corrupted him?
I don't think, my opinion is that the Death Note does not corrupt people, but I think it has corrupted Light. I think certain people it would corrupt, and I think certain people might, I don't know, kill the owners of the annoying dog next door or something. I don't know, but it's it's impossible to say because we're in the confines of this fictional universe. But my feeling was it had corrupted him, and that that was crystal clear to me in Volume 7 with that when that 1 page, I win exactly as planned, and yet. Even after all of this, L still has not cleared him of suspicion. So what was the point of the whole rigmarole? Well,
yeah, anyway. L is just confused because he was sure that Light was Kita, but then there's this fake rule that he doesn't know is fake about if you don't write a name in the if you stop writing names in the Death Note for 13 days, then you die.
Yes.
Now. To me, the biggest shock of the series was that he succeeded at getting L killed.
Yeah, yeah.
And
this is also Volume 7. I mean,
yes,
it's key volume again. As soon as he gets the book back, because things have gone to plan, he is able to execute his plan to have L killed by another Shinigami, which is there's a long loop of complicated plot behind that.
Yes.
Well, I should mention, too, that another thing is you get to stages in the series where they've reached a certain point of understanding things, and you can't remember how they got there. Is that you like, wait, how did they get to the stage? Because it's so complicated.
When I was rereading it, like as I was coming up to that point, I was like, I can't remember how he killed L.
Right, right. Yes, he killed L. That was a major shock,
And I mean, now we've given the spoiler warning. I can say this. I was disappointed in the ending because I thought that L might come back. Because I mean, by that point we'd been surprised so many times. I mean, anything seemed possible.
everything is on both sides, the light side and the police side. Somebody executes a plan, and there's already a counter plan in place. So the plan fails. Then there's another plan. Everybody has a plan that succeeds and fails, or is counter planned, etc., etc., etc. So you think, okay, L is killed. They have predicted that he would be killed, and they have already made a deal with the Shinigami realm to somehow fake his death, fake a heart attack, so that it would look like he was dead, because you never see his body. And the thing that the thing that bothered me more than L's death, and bothered me for I believe 9 volumes, was the first one of the key FBI guy that gets killed has a girlfriend.
Oh yes.
That shows up. Okay. Now what happens is this guy dies, and at this stage they think Kira only kills with heart attacks. And this girl, after her fiance, the FBI agent, dies, she figures out. She reasons that, wait a second, maybe he can kill people because of the bizarre circumstances of the death. She figures maybe he can kill people by means other than by heart attacks. So she's about to go to the police to tell them this, and by chance she meets Light there. And Light's like, uh-oh, she's going to tell the police this. I can't let that happen. I have to kill her. So he commands her, he writes in the book that you will commit suicide. And your body will never, in a way that it will never be discovered, and your body will never be found. And she walks off panel, and we never see her again. And every volume, I was like, is this going to be the panel where Naomi comes back?
Yes. Yeah, I was fully expecting her to come back, too. Because the usual sort of rule of this is if you don't actually see it happen, then it probably didn't happen. She didn't actually die. It didn't happen.
I really wanted to see L's autopsy. I wanted to see his body cut open. And I wanted to see her dead body somewhere. But she didn't. She walked off panel, and I was like, okay, the police must have had a counter plan in place so that they knew that she was going to meet him and that we should, get the fake name. I was just expecting some excuse to come up for her to come back, and she didn't. L didn't.
And if that you say that Ohba just sort of wrote without having it all plotted out, sort of makes sense to me. With that and some other things. Well, did you notice there was that Shinigami with the feather headdress?
Yes.
Who said, I'm going to go down and check it out myself, and then we never see him again.
Right. Yeah, right. Interesting. Well, one that really bugged me. Okay, let me spoil volume 12 all to hell.
Okay.
Why at some stage, because Light is under surveillance, he can't do the killings himself. So he gives his notebook to another guy, which you mentioned earlier, Teru Mikami, to do the killings for him. We get a backstory of Teru Mikami, which is unusual because we don't get backstories from Misa or a lot of the other characters. But we get a whole chapter of his background. And the thing is, he was bullied as a kid, and by fluke, by some sort of fate, the kids who bullied him died. And slowly, anybody who ever did him any harm died. It was like he was blessed. And he seemed to have some sort of magic power that he could kill people by wanting them dead. Not with a notebook, just by thinking it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. What's he going to do with this? And when we get to the climax, it looks like a Light has won. He gets the names and faces of all of the enemy team, and he's like, okay, I'm going to get Teru to write them in the book. Teru writes them in the book and fails because the notebook is fake. Long story. Anyway, I thought, oh, Kira's defeated. And I thought, wait a second, what about Teru's secret power of being able to kill anyone who displeases him? Is there suddenly going to be like lightning from heaven or something, and by some fluke these people are going to die, and they didn't? And I thought that was weird. Like, why did they develop this whole story about him having this divine somebody looking over his shoulder, killing everybody in his way, and not follow that up? I thought for sure that was going to show up in the climax. Every page I was turning it, I was like, it's going to happen now, and it never happened. But
I hadn't thought about that. Interesting. I had a question. We still haven't talked about the Shinigami eyes.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it's mentioned early on that that you can make a deal with your Shinigami to get eyes that will allow you to see a person's name and lifespan just by looking at them.
Yes.
So you can get their name and without having to like ask or find out some way. But the price for doing that is half your remaining lifespan.
Yes.
And Light never does that because he wants to have a long reign as the god of his utopia. Misa has the Shinigami eyes. And then she gives them up, and then she gets them again. And then it surprised me that we didn't see her die, even though she gave up half her remaining lifespan twice.
Yes. Well, we don't know. We don't know how long her lifespan is, and also, I mean, if her lifespan was 80, well, now she's going to die at 20. Oh no, she's already 20. Maybe her lifespan. If her lifespan was 100, maybe she's dying.
Remaining lifespan, not
right.
Full lifespan.
Right,
so.
Remaining lifespan, right. So she should, by trading twice, she should be down pretty low.
Yeah.
But I think certain things like, I think accidental deaths and stuff override a lot of that stuff. Like, if you have traded, like, they were a bit vague about it, but I think once or twice was mentioned something about, like, if you trade your lifespan and you're going to live, so now you're going to live to the age of 40, but you could get hit by a truck at 28. It was some weird thing about that was not very clear.
Yeah, well, and Light's long story, and I didn't get this far in rereading, so I don't quite remember it, but Light's father gets the Shinigami eyes.
Yes.
And he gives up half his remaining lifespan, but then he's shot, like, within a few chapters and dies.
Yes.
And I guess that overrides the remaining lifespan that he had.
That's what I assume that was one example of the case where if an accident happens, you can die before your predicted lifespan. Which, I mean, what the hell does predicted lifespan mean anyway?
but also,
maybe, I mean, if you think about that, if he got the eyes and he died 5 days later, maybe his predicted lifespan was 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he was going to 10 days later, and then he was reduced to 5. I don't know.
But then also, before he dies, he looks at Light, and he can see his lifespan, which he thinks means that Light is not Kita, because if you...
No, he sees no lifespan. He sees his name without a lifespan.
But anyway, he concludes...
Oh, no, he does see his lifespan. You're right.
He concludes that Light is not Kita.
That's right, yes.
But I was trying to figure out why that would be, because
that was
Light...
No, that was explained in when Misa first found Light. Because what happens is, if you have the Shinigami eyes, you cannot see the lifespan of another person with the Death Note. So when the first time Misa is looking for Light to try to find out who Kira is, she arranges to meet him, and there's complicated reasons, whatever. Light is in a huge group of people, and he's like, this way she won't know who I am. But she looks at the crowd, and everybody has a number, a lifespan, except for Light, because Light has a notebook, and she says, that's him.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a notebook, you cannot see that person's lifespan. But the thing is, at this stage, when his father dies, Light has given up his notebook. So his lifespan is visible again. So when he sees the lifespan, he knows that he is not Kira, because he doesn't have a notebook.
The thing was, it had gotten so complicated that I wasn't sure if Light owned a notebook or not at that stage.
Yes. And you start to forget, and you start to stop caring at certain stage, which is why I thought maybe it should have been 3 volumes, shorter. But, you start to stop. Yeah, it gets a bit hard to follow. And I even in the appendix book, the How to Read Death Note, Volume 13, they've got charts and stuff about who owns the Death Notes when, and you're just like, what the hell's going on? It's not, you can't follow the appendix. I need an appendix for the appendix to explain it. Because you get shuffled around, and there are 3 Death Notes total in the series. If you can track them, you might do okay. But it does get so confusing. But I think it does lay out in a way. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Now, I made a list of problems that I found with the story, or at least they were maybe things that it got so complicated that I just missed the explanation.
Okay.
So when Misa is the second Kita, and she's nobody knows who she is, and she sends these videotapes to the TV station, where you can't see her, but she's talking and making announcements. Did she disguise her voice? They never addressed that, but
I think they always disguise her voice, because otherwise they wouldn't assume it was the same Kira.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't have assumed it was a guy.
Yeah. Every all of those conversations on the computers between Light and L, every conversation is scrambled voices.
Yeah, I noticed there was, after L dies and Light is impersonating L, he says he can fix it so that his voice sounds the same as what other people were hearing before.
I think even when they were talking before L was, I think they were always using scrambled voices. Well, masked. Yeah.
I wondered if Light, this is not exactly a story problem, but I wondered if Light attended his father's funeral. Because you never see that, and I wondered if...
He doesn't seem to mourn much.
Right, yeah, he's so focused on his goal that even that doesn't seem to bother him that much.
Yeah, it doesn't distract him much.
Now, the biggest problem that I found was that for several volumes, they're in the U.S.,
yes.
And never once was language barrier an issue.
No, it was never an issue. And also, I found it very odd that the TV crew from Sakura TV in Japan was flying around in a helicopter in the U.S.
Yes, they're in New York. Yeah, that was also very strange. And then in Los Angeles, Light and the police are watching Japanese TV. Of this occurrence in New York.
I guess they could get net TV or something, but I did find it odd that I thought they were defunct as police at that stage, but maybe things had changed. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember, because they were police and they weren't police and they were police again.
Then they had to quit because the police didn't want to have anything to do with the Kira case anymore because of various pressures. And I thought, boy, how did they get all of that computer gear over to the States? They're not official police anymore. But maybe they were reactivated at that stage. I can't remember, because at some stage later on, it does seem that they are police again. And I couldn't remember when they had gotten their status back. It's a bit... Yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
Now, another point about knowing a person's name in order to use the Death Note on them, it struck me as a little odd when I thought about it a certain way, because a name is a legal matter, and not, I don't know if they're thinking of it as more kind of a spiritual matter.
Well, there was some point, I think when they were talking about the Shinigami eyes, where it might have even been in how to use it, where it says, with the Shinigami eyes, you will be able to see the name of the person you need to write in the Death Note. And I believe somewhere else somebody mentioned the family register, which is a Japanese or administrative kind of thing where everybody's name is written in the register. Mm-hmm. So that was not, what's your real name? Who knows? Yeah. You only know with the Shinigami eyes. I don't know what standard they were using in this book. I think they were using the family register for Japanese characters. I don't know what they were using for, foreign characters.
Mm-hmm. But there's a scene just after Light has given up the notebook, and so he and Misa have both given up their notebooks. They don't remember anything about Death Notes or any of that, but they're trying to prove whether they're innocent or not, and Light's father takes them both out in a car and acts like he's going to shoot Light, and he fires the gun inches from Light's face, and it's a blank. But even if it's a blank, wouldn't Light have gotten serious powder burns?
Powder burn, deafness, ringing in the ears, all sorts of.
But it's like the blank is just like nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
It does go off. There's a bang. It's not the gun's not loaded, but.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a dramatic moment. So I allowed it certain. That's not the kind of glitch I was worried about with this book. I was worried about serious plot, you made a mistake,
And also a little thing that I think Ohba must have decided that Misa was a celebrity after she was introduced, because the second time that Light's sister meets Misa, then she's talking about, I've seen you in magazines or whatever.
Yeah,
but she didn't say anything like that the first time.
yeah, that seemed like a secondary development. Like it seemed, because her celebrity becomes useful later on, which makes me wonder, for various things, which makes me wonder about, did he really not plan this? Because it serves so many purposes. And yeah, it did seem to be added on like the second time around. Whereas first chapter, she's just seems to be just this high school girl with nothing really special about her.
Yeah, well, wearing lingerie on the street, but
yeah.
Now, when I got to the end of Volume 10, in my notes I jotted down a few ideas about how the story might end.
Okay.
Because I had kind of forgotten about all the foreshadowing earlier on about because we'd gone through so many twists and turns by then. So, of course, one idea was Light dies, which he does. Or I thought maybe Light just gets caught and ends up in jail or something. Or Light succeeds, gets his perfect world, and either hates it or realizes that he became what he was trying to eliminate. That might have been interesting too, but
yeah, that's interesting, because I was always throughout the series, it becomes especially with the first L, the question is always going to be, it always becomes, who's going to win? Is Light going to win, quote unquote, or is L going to win, quote unquote? And I was kind of more interested in what was happening beyond, in the world outside where all of these criminals were dying, and how the world was reacting to that. And you don't really see a lot of that. There's kind of a cultish formation around Kira, but you don't really see, how day-to-day life would change. It
is kind of vague.
At the end of the book, they revealed that violent crime or crime is down 70%. And I thought, wow, well, that's, I didn't know if it was an unusual number. It should have been higher or whatever. But I thought, I kind of was interested in seeing what that universe was like. So I thought there was a possibility at the end. I thought, well, maybe, he's going to succeed and he's going to have the world he wants. But it's interesting in Volume 12, even after he's been exposed as Kira, but, 100% Light is Kira. I thought, there's still a couple hundred pages left, and I was like, oh my God, I bet it's going to turn around, because it always turns around. It had been turning around for 11 volumes. I thought, he's going to find some way to turn this thing on its head and win. Even in the, although it's not very clear, and, he suggests, how do you know that notebook isn't fake that you've got now? Which they think they've got the real notebook. And he is trying to escape out of the situation, so how do you know it's not fake? And it's just kind of a throwaway line, but actually in the interviews, Ohba reveals that, maybe it is fake. So, it's still kind of, there's still things that are not clear in the end. It's still flip-flop.
But yeah, that's interesting. They didn't really give much of a face to the supporters of Kita. I mean, there were some characters who were supporters of Kita, but yeah, the overall world that had been created, we just sort of got through exposition.
Yeah,
Light was talking about more people are coming over to Kita's site, and
right, yeah. But I mean, that's not. I mean, I can't complain about what the book is not. I mean, it's not. It was never intended to be about that. It was always just intended to be about Light versus L. So I don't know if it's really, if there's any real point in complaining that it's not a book that it is not. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Getting back to L a minute. With him dying and not coming back, it made the story a bit unsatisfying for me. I mean, his successor comes in, Nier, and Nier eventually outwits Light, but Nier wasn't even known to us until like volume 7 or 8.
Well, he's not known until after L dies.
Right.
I mean, L's replacement characters, replacement detectives, are not introduced until after L's death.
Right. So, and we don't really... It's hard for me to feel like there's a hero in the story, because Light is really the villain.
Yeah. Yes,
Light L dies, so
it's interesting. But Light is the protagonist. I mean, it's Faust again.
Yes, he's the protagonist, but he's not the good guy.
He's not the good guy, and L is kind of L and Light also do questionable things. Or not Light. L and his successors, Nier and Mello, all two more great names. Are also they do morally questionable things. I thought their introduction. I mean, it's interesting because again, I mean, it sags in those later volumes, and he really did not need to introduce replacements for L. Why not just I don't know, maybe find some other way to catch him other than have just replacement detectives come in and do the same thing for another 3 or 4 volumes. Apparently in the movies, which I have not seen, L is the one that finishes it out. There's no Nier and Mello. It's Light versus L in the end.
Yeah, well, I think that would have been more satisfying. And also, I felt like there was more that we could have learned about L. And it just his behavior is a little strange. Well, maybe he's just supposed to be kind of a hikikomori, reclusive guy. But
well, you get the impression from all of those kids from Whammy House that they're all a bit eccentric and have strange obsessive compulsive disorders, like stacking things or eating certain things,
Mellow eating chocolate, and
I thought there might even be some autism, some level of autism. And not intentionally by the authors, but that's the way the depiction came out to me. I mean, after L dies, you get a bit of the background about Whammy House and where he came from. Excuse me. So I guess that's kind of, finally you discover a little bit about this guy. Like they're training detectives at this orphanage to become replacement L's.
L's or M's and N's in this case.
There were 2 other characters with strange names that I hated too, like that con man and the thief that L brings in at some stage. I can't remember their names now, but He and Weedy and something else. Anyway,
Albert, I think.
Yeah.
In the very last panel, I guess that's Misa.
It's not.
You don't think so?
No, it's not. Well, I mean, I thought, is that Misa? Apparently lots of people online thought, is that Misa? But in the encyclopedia, the interview with Obata, he says, and Ohba, they say it's not Misa, and Obata just wanted to end the book with a beautiful image, but it's not her.
I see. I mean, her eyes even look like Shinigami eyes.
That is, that's a fault of the artist, drawing to certain conventions, I think.
I see.
But no, it's not her. I have to say about the ending. The ending is.
I think it would work better if it is her.
It might.
because otherwise we don't see what happened to her after.
We don't know what happened to her
after Light died.
That's right. We don't know. But in the interview book again, there's certain insights. There's not a lot of the encyclopedia is filler, but there's some insights in the. She said in an earlier volume that without Light I couldn't live. So the author assumes that maybe she killed herself, or something like that after he died. I don't know. I was going to say about the ending, the last chapter, as is often the case with manga of 12 to 18 volumes, complete final ones, the endings are just glorious, and I thought that was the case here too. They often just have like 10 silent pages in a row, and it's awesome. I really love the ending. I thought it was beautiful the last couple pages. I thought there's some weird things in conclusion which are strange. Like they have the showdown with with Light. I keep getting them confused, and that's interesting too because L and Light, the same first letter. They have the final showdown, and Light dies. And then there's a little bit of it's 1 year later, and there's another mission comes up. Now the police are working with near on other cases. And it's exactly 1 year later, and there's a case comes up in the same warehouse where they had the final showdown at the light. And it's not explained why the character is like, oh, it's exactly 1 year later and we're going to the same warehouse. Isn't that strange? And that's the end of it. I'm like, yeah, that is strange. Why didn't you explain? That's a very mystical thing to put on the last page of your comic and not give any sort of explanation for. But I thought, as usual with great, when great manga, and there's still some mysteries at the end, and there's a few silent pages at the end, which is also great. And I always enjoy, and I really love Volume 12, despite having problems with 8 through 11 being a bit drawn out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when our podcast ends, we'll just have silence at the last few minutes.
That would be awesome. But it's going to be beautiful silence. It's got beautiful things that have to be happening. The podcasters won't be able to see. And the only other thing I want to add is that Ryuk is such a great design. And it's already iconic, and this comic book is only, 5 years old, and it's already such an identifiable image already.
Right, yeah, he was the only character who I knew before I read it.
Exactly, yeah.
Death Note is published by Viz Media. I want to thank all our listeners who have given us ratings and reviews on iTunes. Our average rating is now at 4.5 stars, but we'd love for it to be 5 out of 5, so help us out and go to iTunes and rate us. Leaving a review along with it would be appreciated too. Special thanks to Rosemary CG for the nice review. You can also help us get the word out by going to deconstructingcomics.com, finding your favorite episode, and clicking the share button to post that episode on Facebook, Twitter, or dozens of other networking sites. I tweet about the new episode every Monday, so you can help by retweeting my announcement. My Twitter name is Stingpin. Don't forget that we also have a group on Facebook, which has several topic discussions open. The link to our Facebook group and links to follow Mulele and me on Twitter are on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. And of course, you can also comment on any particular episode on the site itself. You can support us financially by sending a donation via PayPal, using the link on our site, or advertise your own comics-related endeavors on the site through Project Wonderful. You can also sponsor the show directly. Write me at mail@deconstructingcomics.com for details. Any donations you make will help offset the costs of web hosting, book purchases, and advertising. If you have any comments, questions, programming suggestions, or want to submit your comic to be reviewed on the show, write me at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Or you can send me a message via Twitter or Facebook. Deconstructing Comics is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com. Next week, 2 different Wizards of Oz. A comparison of 2 recent comics versions of L. Frank Baum's classic children's story, one by David Chauvel and Enrique Fernandez, originally published in French, but available in English through Image Comics, and last year's Marvel version by Eric Schanauer and Scotty Young. I'll be joined by Rashad Doucette, who you may know from the Sequelab podcast, and who is a published children's book author in his own right, to compare the approaches that the 2 different teams took to their respective adaptations. We'll also be talking about a manga series that not so much adapts The Wizard of Oz as riffs on it, Toto, The Wonderful Adventure, by Yuko Osada. So follow us down the yellow brick road next week. Till then, thanks for listening. This is Tim. See you next week on Deconstructing Comics.